Chapter 61. Does the Dark Lord not need to sleep? Xiaji and the Weasley twins gathered together, whispering among themselves. Then Fred and George were utterly astonished. Xiaji's ideas were simply brilliant. He was a true prankster genius. They heard him mention that he was still working on a daydream potion, instant attention-dodging sweets, and biting quills. Though none of these had been perfected yet, just hearing such ingenious concepts was enough to make the twins regard Xiaji as a kindred spirit. First-year Gryffindors, follow me. I'm Prefect Percy Weasley, and I'll lead you to our common room. Percy stood up and called out. By now, the feast had officially concluded. The prefects were guiding the new students back to their respective common rooms. Tomorrow night at 11 o'clock, meet us in the common room, Fred declared. I'll have Lee Jordan try your expansion toffee as soon as we get back, George added with a grin. We can't wait to see Lee floating all the way to the ceiling. Xiaji silently mourned Lee Jordan for 3 seconds in his mind, then followed the group of new students out of the Great Hall. Cassandra Vole tugged at Xiaji's robe. What were you talking about with those twins? Just having some fun, of course, Xiaji replied with a smile. Cassandra's emerald green eyes gazed at him quietly. Well, they're incredibly talented and clever. They can create all sorts of fascinating things. Cassandra immediately caught on. You want them to join us? Exactly. But if anything dangerous comes up, Cassandra paused, then suddenly smiled. Make sure to include me too. Xiaji felt deeply touched. In the past, she would have threatened him not to take any risks, but now she wanted to join him. Mr. Vole must be heartbroken. Cassandra had now completely become Xiaji in every way. That night, the house elf Coffee, tasked with gathering information, returned from Hogwarts to the Vole estate, bringing news that Cassandra had been sorted into Gryffindor. Mr. Vole, heartbroken, drank 2 bottles of his finest vintage in a row. Mrs. Vole, however, seemed overjoyed. She believed this was her daughter's own choice, and she had no right to interfere. Besides, Xiaji was truly exceptional. She was thoroughly satisfied. The Gryffindor common room was decorated in a very cozy manner. Many young wizards instantly fell for its charm. Xiaji bid Cassandra and Hermione good night, and they parted ways. The girls were led to the girls' dormitory. Xiaji, meanwhile, joined Harry and Ron as they headed to the boys' dormitory. Upon reaching his dormitory, Xiaji was surprised to find that, unlike Harry and Ron, he had his own private room. Harry and Ron, on the other hand, shared a room with 4 others. Why do you get your own room? Harry and Ron asked curiously. Xiaji had no idea. Perhaps it was simply because there was 1 extra spot available, so they placed him there. Still, this suited him just fine. His gaze drifted to Scabbers, the rat perched on Ron's shoulder. Sharing a room with Peter Pettigrew made him feel rather uneasy. As for Peter, Xiaji had no intention of disturbing him for now. He still had uses in the future. After a quick wash-up, Xiaji collapsed onto his bed. Just as he closed his eyes, he heard the system's familiar voice. Ding! The host has successfully entered Hogwarts. The system now issues a new mission. Don't tell me it wants me to go on a late-night adventure right now. I'm still unfamiliar with the castle. Xiaji frowned. Ding! Hogwarts Library is Europe's most extensive magical library, containing countless magical texts. The host must infiltrate the forbidden section of the library this semester and read 100 black magic tomes. Upon mission completion, the host receives 5 skill points and a combined magic talent. Failure incurs no penalties. At this point, Xiaji just wanted to smash the system. A whole semester just to read 100 black magic books? Are you seriously expecting me to spend every night of this semester in the forbidden section? I won't get any sleep at all. This is downright cruel. Ding. So, will you accept the mission or not? Damn it, you glitchy system. Do you even realize that even Voldemort needs sleep? This is utterly unfair. Ding. Does this mean the host declines the mission? I accept it, but I'm waiting until tomorrow night. Even if the King of Heaven himself showed up now, I'm going to bed. Suddenly, Xiaji noticed his DA ring heating up, with Cassandra's name appearing on it. Well, Not even the King of Heaven could stop him from sleeping now, unless Cassandra summoned him. The next morning, Xiaozhi appeared in the great hall with dark circles under his eyes. He talked with Cassandra late into the night. He had no idea what time it was by the time he finally went to bed. Sitting at the Gryffindor table, he glanced at the empty space before him and tentatively said, "1 piece of bread and a glass of milk, please." Instantly, a beautifully plated piece of bread and a glass of milk appeared before him. As he nibbled on the bread, Xiaozhi marveled at how convenient it was to have house elves around. Suddenly, his shoulder was thumped hard. "Your expansion toffee was absolutely amazing." Lee Jordan ended up floating all the way to the ceiling. He had to sleep there. Fred and George excitedly plopped down beside him. Xiaozhi forced a smile. "That's wonderful. Didn't get much sleep last night?" "Wait, did you sneak off on a late-night adventure?" Of course, Xiaozhi didn't reveal the truth. Instead, he pulled out 2 cookies from his ring and handed one to each twin. "I made these last night. How about having them for breakfast?" George and Fred accepted the cookies curiously. "What effect do they have?" Xiaozhi grinned. "Care to give them a try?" They exchanged glances, then ate the cookies simultaneously. Almost instantly, thick white beards began sprouting all over their faces. Within moments, both twins had transformed into little old men with bushy, white beards. Staring at their new appearances, Fred and George burst into uncontrollable laughter. "I have to say, those beards suit you both perfectly." Chapter 62. The professor wanted to earn points for his own house. Xiaozhi turned around and saw a smiling Professor Dumbledore. The old man seemed to have deliberately walked down from the staff table. "Xiaozhi, after class, could you come to my office? It's on the 8th floor. There's a prominent stone creature at the entrance, so it's easy to spot. The password is ice lemon juice." "Of course, Professor." Xiaozhi nodded in response. Professor Dumbledore left with a smile, but before doing so, he suggested that Fred and George tie a bow tie to their beards. At that moment, the beards on Fred and George's faces were already beginning to fall off. Seems the effect didn't last long enough," Xiaozhi remarked regretfully. "Xiaozhi, this is already incredible. I definitely don't want to end up like Lee Jordan, wearing a full beard throughout an entire class. What's the name of this cookie?" I haven't given it a name yet. How about white beard cookies?" Xiaozhi scratched his head in thought. Fred and George wanted to keep chatting with Xiaozhi, but Lee Jordan appeared just then, wielding a batter's bat, and began chasing them. The 3 of them left the great hall amidst much bickering. Moments later, Hermione and Cassandra Vole arrived and took seats beside Xiaozhi to eat breakfast. For some reason, however, Harry and Ron were nowhere to be seen. Xiaozhi figured they'd probably gotten lost. Fortunately, the night before, he'd carefully memorized the route back to the dorms from the Great Hall. Classes at Hogwarts began at 9 in the morning, a true blessing for Xiaozhi, who'd endured years of rigid academic schedules in his past life. Back then, he had to wake up at 6 every day. Thus, when Xiaozhi and the 2 girls reached the Transfiguration classroom, there was still plenty of time to spare. Only a few students were present. On the podium sat a tabby cat. Xiaozhi grabbed Hermione, who was about to approach the cat, preventing her from doing anything reckless. Professor McGonagall likely wouldn't appreciate anyone petting her head or scratching her chin. Xiaozhi and the girls found seats and sat down. As soon as she sat, Hermione opened her Transfiguration textbook and began murmuring to herself. She'd attempted Transfiguration countless times at home, yet made little to no progress. For now, Transfiguration wasn't part of Xiaozhi's training regimen. After all, aside from him, this level of magic was far too advanced for young witches and wizards of their age. It simply wouldn't translate into practical combat power. It made more sense to spend time mastering explosive spells instead. Given his current abilities, Xiaozhi certainly didn't need to review the textbook. He glanced at Professor McGonagall in her feline form, then turned to Cassandra. "If I ever master Animagus, what animal do you think I'd turn into?" Cassandra tilted her head thoughtfully. "A little snake?" "Come on, I'm a Gryffindor," Xiaozhi protested. "Though, Without the shield charm, he'd probably have ended up in Azkaban instead. Hermione chimed in, "Turning into a little kitten sounds lovely too. Why do neither of you think I could become a mighty lion?" Hermione and Cassandra sized Xiaji up from head to toe, then shook their heads in unison. "I've read that the animal form depends on both personality and physical build," Hermione explained. "Your personality matches, but with that frame, maybe you really would turn into a kitten?" Cassandra giggled, covering her mouth. Xiaji fell speechless. "If you do become a kitten, you've got to let me hold you first." Cassandra gazed at him eagerly, then immediately blushed, realizing she'd said the wrong thing. Suddenly, the tabby cat on the podium leapt down, reverting the dare into Professor McGonagall. She smiled warmly at Xiaji. "If you wish to learn Animagus, feel free to come to me anytime. Your abilities are sufficient, but promise me, never attempt it alone." Her tone turned grave toward the end. Animagus transformations were perilous. A single misstep could render one permanently trapped in animal form. Hermione stared in shock at Professor McGonagall's reversion from cat to human. She'd been thinking of petting her just moments ago. Thank goodness Xiaji had stopped her. "Professor, rest assured, I won't try it alone," Xiaji assured her. Truthfully, he had no intention of learning Animagus. The process was far too cumbersome and downright uncomfortable. The first step alone deterred him. One had to keep a single mandrake leaf in one's mouth for a full month without removing or swallowing it. Xiaji figured he'd rather collect more rewards from the system later. A month of constant leaf chewing? That'd seriously interfere with eating. After exchanging a few words with Xiaji, Professor McGonagall reverted to her cat form and resumed sitting on the podium. Harry and Ron arrived late to class, relieved that the professor hadn't yet returned, only to be scolded by McGonagall upon her rehumanization. "The castle's corridors played tricks on us," Harry whined to Xiaji. "And we even ran into Peeves." Professor McGonagall began lecturing. Her expression stern, she declared, "Transfiguration is the most complex and dangerous magic you'll study at Hogwarts. Any disruptions in my class will result in immediate expulsion and permanent bans. I've warned you all." With a flick of her wand, she transformed the podium into a squealing piglet, then reverted it back. The students were utterly awestruck. They all yearned to master such feats. Yet this required immense skill, far beyond their current level. McGonagall expounded on numerous theoretical concepts, and the students scribbled down copious notes. The lesson grew tedious, and sleep-deprived Xiaji began dozing off, his head bobbing until he finally slumped over. He slept soundly until both feet got stepped on, once by Hermione and once by Cassandra. Startled awake, he saw Professor McGonagall gazing at him with pursed lips. His face flushed crimson. He was doomed. Sleeping in her class?
How dare he?
"Xiaji, come up here. Let me see your transfiguration skills. If you've improved, I'll award points to your house. Otherwise, I'll have to deduct them," she declared sternly. She simply had to rein in her most promising student. Xiaji approached and drew his ebony wand, then gently waved it toward the podium. Instantly, it twisted and reshaped itself into a lifelike phoenix. This phoenix mirrored Fawkes in every way. Its eyes sparkled with intelligence, and its song filled the room with euphoric harmony. It circled the students several times before landing on Xiaji's shoulder. Incredible. Xiaji conjured a phoenix. He's learned so much from Professor Dumbledore. It's so beautiful. I wish I could touch it. Professor McGonagall couldn't suppress a pleased smile. Flawless transfiguration. Gryffindor gains 20 points. Only then did Xiaji catch on. So the professor wanted to award points to her own house. She hadn't been planning to punish him at all. Chapter 63. Girls leave their IDs. Boys must become stronger. Xiaji was well aware that enrolling in first-year classes was akin to a max-level player rampaging through a beginner's village. Of course, Professor McGonagall understood this as well. Yet, given the opportunity to earn points for her house, why wouldn't she take it? After all, Slytherin had already secured 6 consecutive victories in the House Cup, while Gryffindor hadn't won in just as long. Now, with Xiaoji serving as a perfect tool for earning points, why not make use of him? From this point onward, Xiaoji dared no longer doze off during class. Fortunately, the theoretical portion had already concluded. What remained was purely practical application. Professor McGonagall distributed a matchstick to each student, instructing them to transform it into a needle. Having witnessed Xiaoji's flawless transfiguration skills earlier, everyone was now brimming with motivation, eager to give it a try themselves. They were all around the same age. If he could do it, why couldn't they? What if I'm a natural talent too? Yet reality proved harsh. Despite immense effort, most students saw no change whatsoever in their matchsticks. Professor McGonagall promptly called upon Xiaoji, appointing him as a temporary teaching assistant to guide the others in their transfiguration attempts. Naturally, this act earned Xiaoji an additional 5 points from the professor. To be honest, Xiaoji felt these points were hardly significant. The potions class hadn't even begun, and Harry refused to heed advice or read his textbooks. These few points wouldn't even make a dent in what Professor Snape might deduct. Under Xiaoji's careful guidance, Cassandra and Hermione eventually succeeded in transforming their matchsticks into needles. This delighted Professor McGonagall, who promptly awarded her house another 10 points, 5 for each girl. As for Harry and Ron, Xiaoji paid them little attention. Teaching others was exhausting work, so he simply let the girls handle things while the boys fumbled on their own. By the end of class, none of the others had made any real progress, unless one counted Seamus's matchstick, which inexplicably exploded. Post-class, Xiaoji headed straight to the 8th floor, arriving at the entrance of the headmaster's office. Gazing at the rather unsightly stone creature before him, he spoke the password, "Iced lemonade." The creature leapt aside, revealing a spiral staircase. Upon entering Dumbledore's office, Xiaoji noticed the headmaster was absent. It was a spacious, enchanting circular chamber, filled with all sorts of whimsical little sounds. On slender-legged tables stood numerous peculiar silver objects, spinning and releasing wisps of smoke. The walls were lined with portraits of past headmasters and headmistresses, men and women alike, all softly snoring within their frames. A massive table with claw-shaped legs dominated the room. Behind it, perched on a shelf, lay a tattered, crumpled wizard's hat, the Sorting Hat. The Sorting Hat parted its giant mouth and exclaimed, "Haha, it's you. Have you come today to fulfill yesterday's promise and bathe me?" Actually, Professor Dumbledore summoned me here. Once we've discussed matters, I'll gladly help you with a bath. Wonderful. May I choose the scent of the cleaning solution? Dumbledore once mentioned that Muggle-made cleaners are quite lovely, some even smell wonderfully sweet. I'm afraid I don't have those, but I've got a highly effective magical cleaner guaranteed to satisfy you. Just as Xiaoji chatted merrily with the Sorting Hat, Dumbledore's voice rang out from behind him. "Seems you two are having a splendid time." Truth be told, in my youth, I too entertained the notion of giving it a wash, though eventually I let it slip my mind. Dumbledore gestured for Xiaoji to sit before his desk, then took his own seat. "Care for some iced lemonade? It's delightfully sweet and tart. I find it utterly delightful." Xiaoji nodded, and instantly, his cup was filled with twice as much lemonade. Dumbledore then pushed a small dish of biscuits and sweets toward him. Taking a sip, Xiaoji frowned in confusion. The lemonade lacked any acidity and tasted overwhelmingly sweet. "How did you find your first class of the term?" Dumbledore inquired with a smile. "It was absolutely wonderful. Professor McGonagall truly is a transfiguration master," Xiaoji replied cheerfully, flanked by Cassandra on one side and Hermione on the other. "Truly a delightful experience. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. You'll undoubtedly miss such moments in time to come." Dumbledore's expression turned solemn. "I summoned you today to confirm a few details. Please recount to me that black wizard you encountered at Gringotts. What distinguishing features did he possess?" Xiaoji found this peculiar. Hadn't he already relayed this information to Dumbledore? Why ask again now? "Any detail at all will suffice," Dumbledore clarified. A thought struck Xiaoji. "Very well, let me think." He furrowed his brows, feigning deep contemplation. Anything at all? Dumbledore nodded affirmatively. I recall smelling something quite strong, reminiscent of garlic. Professor, you know me well. I'm intimately familiar with this scent. Back then, I assumed it clung to my own clothes, so I paid it little mind. Yet now I realize, if it had genuinely been on me, it wouldn't have been so potent. Xiaji aimed to steer Dumbledore's thoughts toward Professor Quirrell. Truthfully, he hadn't even noticed any distinct scent on him at the time. Upon hearing the mention of garlic, Dumbledore's expression instantly softened. Chapter 64. 10 Bedtime Stories Every Day. This information is very important to me. It has helped me confirm several things. What things, exactly? Well, allow me to keep this a little secret for now. I'll reveal it to you later. Dumbledore then took out a small jar from his drawer. This is a cleaning solution I specifically brought back from a Muggle supermarket. It smells lovely. I believe the Sorting Hat will like it too. Alright. Xiaji understood that Dumbledore was essentially ushering him out. He left the headmaster's office carrying the Sorting Hat. Xiaji realized that Dumbledore now fully believed Quirrell was the dark wizard who'd infiltrated Gringotts earlier, intent on stealing the Philosopher's Stone. The sudden secrecy probably meant Dumbledore was planning to set up that trap from the original story. He likely wanted to test Harry's character, to see whether Harry truly possessed the courage needed to face whatever lay ahead. Xiaji wondered whether he himself fell within Dumbledore's calculations. He figured there was a high chance Dumbledore would ban him. After all, if he stayed around, Quirrell wouldn't stand a chance. No longer dwelling on it, Xiaji grabbed Fred and George along the way.
I stole the Sorting Hat.
I plan to give it a nice wash. Want to join me? Instantly, Fred and George's eyes lit up. Xiaji, you're a genius. How did you even think of washing the Sorting Hat? Just imagine it. The look on Dumbledore's face when he suddenly finds the Sorting Hat looking brand new. This sounds like way too much fun. We absolutely have to be part of it. Thus, Xiaji hardly lifted a finger. The cleaning task fell entirely to the ecstatic twins. The Sorting Hat didn't care who was helping it bathe. It didn't expose Xiaji's lie and even silently applauded his cleverness. Professor Flitwick taught charms. He was an extremely short wizard. Xiaji suspected he had goblin blood. Considering Hagrid's half-giant heritage, this seemed entirely plausible. Flitwick stood atop a stack of books just to reach the lectern. During the first lesson, he consulted his roll call. When he reached Harry's name, he shrieked excitedly and promptly collapsed, disappearing from sight. Since this was the very first charms lesson, there were no practical exercises, only theoretical instruction. Xiaji recalled that the levitation charm wouldn't be practiced by students until the night before Halloween. Consequently, Xiaji once again shamelessly fell asleep. Of course, Cassandra and Hermione, having gained experience from that earlier Transfiguration class, had since avoided sitting in the front row. Ever since the start of term, Xiaji seemed perpetually sleep-deprived. Cassandra suspected he sneaked off on nightly adventures. Whenever questioned, Xiaji always made excuses to dodge the topic. Truthfully, this was indeed the case. On the very first night of school, he'd embarked on his first nocturnal escapade with Fred and George. Having earned the twins' trust, Xiaji soon got his hands on the legendary Marauders map. After studying it carefully, he felt disappointed. No trace of Tom Riddle's name appeared anywhere near Quirrell. Had Voldemort abandoned Quirrell's body due to Xiaji's interference? Upon reflection, this seemed plausible. Quirrell's life force had already been severely drained by Voldemort, and after enduring Xiaji's fiendfire, his condition worsened further. Reattaching himself to Quirrell now would likely have killed him outright. Thus, Voldemort's plan to have Quirrell infiltrate Hogwarts had failed completely. It was possible he'd left Quirrell's body and possessed someone or something else. Of course, this wasn't certain. Perhaps the Marauders' map simply couldn't detect Voldemort in his fragmented spirit state. Later, Xiaji performed a divination on Quirrell. The results indicated that for now, it was best not to expose Quirrell's true identity. Why this was so, however, remained unclear. Xiaji saw no explicit answer in his divination. unless he knocked Quirrell unconscious and performed a close-range divination, just as he'd done with Nagini. But if it came to knocking someone out first, was divination even necessary? Later, during defense against the dark arts, Xiaozhi spotted Quirrell again. His complexion looked dreadful. His lesson continued as usual, stumbling through textbook passages. He seemed to pay Xiaozhi no mind, promptly leaving after class. His clumsy teaching made him the laughingstock of everyone present. Since Quirrell's entire body reeked of Voldemort's lingering essence, not even the system could confirm whether Voldemort still lurked at the back of his skull. Xiaozhi decided to shelve this issue for now. He knew Dumbledore had already begun acting. Most likely, Snape had been keeping a close eye on Quirrell. For now, Xiaozhi resolved to stay out of it. With that matter temporarily set aside, Xiaozhi resumed his nightly excursions into the forbidden section of the library. For someone who'd mastered the invisibility charm to perfection, this posed no difficulty whatsoever. Yet this routine left him drowsy during the day, perpetually dozing off in class. Thus, for a long while afterward, history of magic became Xiaozhi's favorite subject. Admittedly, sleeping through history of magic felt incredibly blissful. Still, Xiaozhi believed these hard times wouldn't last long. Thanks to his +9 proficiency in dark magic, reading dark magic texts from the forbidden section came effortlessly. He devoured them at lightning speed, far quicker than when studying other spells. Each night, he managed to read a full 10 dark magic tomes. Now, he treated these 10 books per night as his bedtime stories. There was just one problem. Occasionally, their contents affected Xiaozhi's actual sleep quality. Only heaven knew how psychologically twisted those dark magic authors truly were. Chapter 65. A 10-point deduction is non-negotiable. Friday morning. Xiaozhi ate breakfast in a daze, but Harry and Ron's conversation instantly snapped him out of it. "What classes do we have today?" Harry asked Ron. "We've got 2 potions classes today, together with Slytherin," Ron replied. "Snape is the Slytherin head of house, and they say he favors his own students. Now we'll see if that's true. I hope Professor McGonagall favors us too." But Harry shook his head regretfully, recalling the mountain of homework she'd assigned. He wondered when he'd get the chance to copy Xiaozhi's answers. Only then did Xiaozhi remember today was the first day of potions class. Somehow, though, he had a nagging feeling that today wouldn't go well for him. He trusted his instincts. Yet it was Harry who was supposed to be in trouble today, so why did he himself feel uneasy? Could it be that the minor price he'd paid after performing a divination for Quirrell a few days ago was finally coming due during today's potions lesson? If so, this certainly wasn't a minor price at all. Just then the mail arrived. Dozens of owls suddenly swarmed into the great hall. They circled above the tables until they found their owners, dropping letters or packages onto their laps. Since Xiaozhi enrolled, his owl Snowball had been on vacation, staying put in his dormitory. Before that, Snowball had ferried messages daily between the Leaky Cauldron and Vole Manor, so much so that it nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Now it deserved a proper rest. Harry's owl, Hedwig, fluttered down between the jam dish and sugar bowl, dropping a note onto Harry's plate. Harry promptly opened it, then borrowed Ron's quill to scribble a reply on the back before sending Hedwig off again. "Hagrid invites us to visit him at 3 this afternoon. Xiaozhi, will you come too? He invited you as well." I think I'll pass. I plan to get some sleep." 3 o'clock seemed the perfect time for a nap. Harry looked disappointed. "You can go with Ron." "Oh, and you'd better bring snacks. Otherwise, watch out for chipped teeth," Xiaozhi said before heading off with Cassandra toward the potions classroom. Now wide awake, Xiaozhi trusted his instincts completely. Something was bound to go wrong in Snape's class. Besides, falling asleep during Snape's lesson seemed utterly unrealistic, unless one aimed for eternal slumber. The potions classroom was located underground. It was far colder than the main castle above, and glass jars lined the walls, each containing unidentified animal specimens. Glancing around, Xiaozhi mused that Snape truly was a gloomy sort of person. Snape began class by calling roll, pausing briefly when he reached Harry and Xiaozhi. Yes, he murmured. Harry Potter, our newly arrived celebrity. And Xiaji, I hear you're Professor Dumbledore's personal protege. A mocking smirk appeared on Snape's face. Draco Malfoy and his friends Crabbe and Goyle covered their mouths, snickering. After finishing roll call, Snape gazed across the room with cold, empty eyes, and Xiaji noticed his gaze land squarely on him. Alarm bells rang in Xiaji's mind. Why are you looking at me instead of Harry? You're here to learn the precise science and rigorous craft of potion-making, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, yet perfectly audible. Since no foolish wand-waving is involved, many of you won't recognize this as magic. I don't expect you to truly appreciate the delicate beauty of a simmering cauldron emitting fragrant vapors, nor the enchanting power of liquids that can mesmerize and enchant those who consume them. Yet I can teach you how to elevate your reputation, achieve glory, even stave off death, provided you're not the sort of dunces I usually encounter. Snape turned toward Harry, locking eyes with him for a long moment. Then he posed those 3 infamous questions designed to trip Harry up. Potter, what happens if I add powdered snake root to wormwood infusion? Xiaji silently pulled down Hermione's raised hand and handed her a scrap of parchment. Written on it was a message he'd prepared earlier, essentially telling Hermione that Snape was deliberately trying to humiliate Harry, so she shouldn't raise her hand again. Hermione glanced at Xiaji curiously, but trusting him, she lowered her hand. I have no idea, sir. Harry now deeply regretted not heeding Xiaji's advice. Had he even glanced at the potions textbook, he wouldn't be clueless as to what Snape was asking. Even then, it wouldn't have helped unless he'd memorized the entire book like Hermione. Tsk. Apparently fame doesn't guarantee competence. Let's try once more. Potter, where would you procure a bezoar if I asked you? Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle were now trembling with laughter. Xiaji inwardly sighed. This trial, Harry simply couldn't escape. I have no idea, sir. I suspect you didn't even open a book before school began, didn't you, Potter? And now, Potter, what's the difference between aconite and wolfsbane? I have no idea, sir. You can't expect me to memorize every entry in 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, Harry muttered, finding Snape utterly detestable. Potter, for your insolence, Gryffindor loses 10 points. Sit down. Furious, Harry nearly choked on his rage. He realized Snape didn't merely dislike him. He loathed him. Had Ron not discreetly grabbed his arm, Harry would have charged forward and punched Snape's hideous hooked nose. Xiaji recalled that in the original story, Snape only deducted 1 point from Harry. Now it seemed deduction started at 10 points. Just as Xiaji thought the ordeal was over, Snape strode over and snatched up the scrap of parchment Xiaji had written and left on Hermione's desk, the one Hermione hadn't yet noticed. Chapter 66. Is it true that daffodils symbolize love? Hermione was utterly astonished. She sensed that things were about to go terribly wrong. On that piece of parchment, Xiaji had addressed Snape in a rather disrespectful manner, calling him Old Bat outright. Just as Hermione closed her eyes in despair, bracing for Snape to lose his temper, the parchment was tossed back toward her. To her surprise, there wasn't a single word written on it. Of course, this was Xiaji's doing. Before handing over the parchment, he'd anticipated that Snape might notice it. Thus, he'd written using magic. Once Hermione finished reading, he withdrew the magic, causing all text to vanish. Only Xiaji could pull off such a feat. No other young wizard possessed such ability. You handed Granger a completely blank parchment? Snape stared intently into Xiaji's eyes. Xiaji met his gaze unflinchingly. Professor, as far as I know, lending a classmate a blank parchment doesn't violate any classroom rules. Snape held his gaze for a full 10 seconds before replying in his monotone voice. Since you're so eager to assist your peers, perhaps you'd care to answer the same question I asked Potter? Draco Malfoy began snickering once more. Previously, Xiaji had given him a stern lesson, leaving him deeply resentful, yet his father had explicitly forbidden him from retaliating against Xiaji. Now, witnessing Snape pick on Xiaji filled him with glee. Yet Harry and the others showed no worry for Xiaji at all. Despite frequently dozing off during class, no subject had ever posed a challenge to him. Harry even figured Xiaozhi could graduate early and become a professor himself. Daffodil root powder mixed with mugwort produces a highly potent sedative, commonly known as water of life and death. Feces stone is a mineral extracted from goat stomachs, renowned for its powerful detoxifying properties. Meanwhile, boat-shaped aconite and wolfsbane are essentially the same plant, collectively referred to as aconite. Xiaozhi replied calmly. This was practically an open-book exam. How could it possibly stump him? Even when Snape drew questions from advanced textbooks, Xiaozhi remained unfazed. He'd achieved mastery in 3 areas of potion making. Suddenly, an idea struck him, and he couldn't resist speaking up. Professor, I've heard daffodils are a type of lily. Their symbolic meaning is love. Mugwort, on the other hand, represents sorrow and regret. Silence. Snape roared, his expression utterly bewildered. He stared at Xiaozhi as though he were witnessing some monstrous phenomenon. Xiaozhi feigned innocence, though inwardly he marveled. Those Jihu experts are absolutely brilliant. In his past life, he'd read analyses by Jihu experts regarding the deeper meanings behind Snape's 3 questions. They'd pointed out that daffodils indeed belonged to the lily family, and Lily, Harry's mother, shared the same floral association. Daffodils symbolize eternal remembrance beyond death, while mugwort ties closely to regret. Thus, water of life and death essentially meant a fate worse than death. Consequently, Snape's questions likely carried the subtext, Lily, I deeply regret your death, or my remorse will accompany you eternally. Xiaozhi had always assumed such interpretations were overreaching, yet now, seeing Snape's furious embarrassment. This is a potions class. If you wish to discuss flora, consult Professor Sprout instead. Snape gasped, enunciating each word deliberately. Or perhaps your mind, duller than a troll's, fails to grasp potion-making's intricacies. Should you utter another irrelevant remark, I'll expel you on the spot. Suddenly, Snape leaned over Xiaozhi's desk, his face inches from his. In a voice meant solely for Xiaozhi's ears, he murmured, Boy, don't think you can pull any tricks. I'll be watching you closely. With that, he spun about, his robes flaring dramatically. Xiaozhi knew the answers, yet failed to guide Potter. Moreover, he spoke irrelevantly, Gryffindor loses 50 points. At that moment, Xiaozhi wished he could slap himself. Why had he opened his mouth at all? Within mere minutes, Snape had erased every point Gryffindor had earned through Professor McGonagall's efforts. Cassandra comforted him. These points aren't a big deal. Hermione and I can easily earn them back from other professors. Still, what did you mean by those words? Why did Snape react so violently? It was about Lily's symbolism. When I glanced at you, the thought struck me, and I blurted it out on impulse. Cassandra's face flushed crimson. She'd just learned that lilies symbolized love. Hermione tugged Xiaozhi's sleeve urgently, signaling that Snape was still watching. Snapping into crisis mode, Xiaozhi promptly lowered his head, only for a textbook to smack Ron squarely on the skull from behind. Potions class resumed. Snape divided them into pairs, instructing them to concoct a basic remedy for boils. Gliding through the room in his lengthy black robes, Snape unleashed venomous remarks at every Gryffindor student's back. Suddenly, Xiaozhi heard a loud hissing beside him. Somehow, Neville had melted Seamus's cauldron into a misshapen blob. Acting swiftly, Xiaozhi flicked his wand before the concoction could spill onto the floor, instantly clearing it away. Alas, Neville escaped unscathed no longer. His right arm, drenched in potion, erupted in painful, swollen boils. He wailed in agony. Idiot! Snape bellowed. Did you toss those porcupine quills into the cauldron while it still simmered?
Potter,
Why didn't you warn him? Does witnessing his blunders make you feel superior? Gryffindor loses 10 points. Malfoy snickered once more. Everyone in class, even Xiaozhi, had faced Snape's criticism, yet he alone received praise. Fuming silently, Xiaozhi seized Snape's outburst as cover. With a subtle finger motion, He sent an unprocessed snake fang from Malfoy's desk into his own cauldron. Boom.
Ah.
Malfoy's cauldron exploded. Chapter 67. Soul Magic. Idiot. Why did you put snake fangs into the cauldron? Snape roared in fury. Draco was equally puzzled. He hadn't added any snake fangs at all, so why had his potion suddenly exploded? But now, drenched in his own potion, Draco's body was covered in swollen, painful blisters. He screamed in agony and couldn't utter a single word of defense. Many Slytherin students suffered the same fate. Snape had no choice but to have them all sent to the infirmary. On the Gryffindor side, thanks to Siagi's intervention, Neville's potion never even hit the ground. It vanished midair. Only Neville's own hands got splashed. No one else was affected. An hour later, the first potions class finally came to an end. As they climbed out of the dungeon classroom, Harry kept complaining about Snape's unfairness. Neville's cauldron exploded, and Harry lost points. Draco's cauldron exploded, and Harry still lost points. Snape claimed Draco had been frightened by the state of Neville's cauldron, and the reason was that Harry hadn't warned Neville in advance. Hence, points deducted. This outcome was completely unexpected for Siagi. After class, he admitted to Harry that he'd been the one to make Draco's cauldron explode, then apologized. After all, it was his fault Harry had lost points. To his surprise, Harry seemed delighted upon hearing this. He declared that Siagi had avenged him, as he'd long resented the smug Draco. Siagi shrugged it off after a moment's thought. No matter how many points Snape deducted, Professor Dumbledore would restore them all by semester's end. After lunch, Siagi bid farewell to Cassandra and the others, then returned to his dormitory and collapsed onto his bed, instantly falling asleep. The previous night had been his third visit to the Forbidden Section. He'd read over 30 books on black magic. Since classes resumed the next day, he'd always gone to bed around 2 a.m., leaving him with limited time. But today was Friday, and there were no classes on Saturday. Thus, Siagi resolved to pull an all-nighter at the library that very evening. His goal? To read all 100 black magic books before Sunday. Yet Siagi had still underestimated his own proficiency in black magic, currently at level 9. By Saturday night, he'd already finished the 99th book. Now it was 5 a.m., technically Sunday already. Logically, Siagi should have returned. But only one book remained, and he decided to finish it first. No one ever came to the library this early. Using the system interface, he precisely selected the final book. He silently vowed never to stay up this late again, otherwise, he'd surely go bald. The cover of this last book was wrapped entirely in unknown black leather, bearing not a single word. Yet the system interface revealed its title, Soul Magic. Worse still, the book couldn't be opened directly. Should anyone attempt to open it, they'd instantly faint and lose all memory of ever having seen the book. Thankfully, Siagi received a warning via the system. Otherwise, he'd have collapsed in the Forbidden Section and been dragged to Professor Dumbledore's office by Madame Pants the next day. Meanwhile, the book would automatically return to its shelf thanks to special library magic. This only piqued Siagi's curiosity. Per the system's instructions, he traced a clockwise circle on the cover with his finger. After 3 repetitions, the black cover gradually shifted to a blood-red hue. A soft click echoed from within, as though a lock had been undone. Siagi slowly opened the book, revealing a strikingly lifelike anatomical diagram of the human body. Why include such an image in a book on souls? Intrigued, he read on. It turned out this diagram aimed to explore where, exactly, the human soul resided within the body. Siagi agreed this was a vital question. Everyone knew that upon death, the soul departed, or lingered in some form, like Hogwarts ghosts. But where did it hide while one was still alive? The author described conducting a series of indescribable experiments before posing another query. When a person suffered minor injuries, their soul remained unharmed. Yet when grievous, irreparable wounds befell them, such as limb loss in Muggles, their souls also became fragmented at that very instant. Conversely, Wizards who'd lost limbs but restored them via magic retained intact souls. What caused this disparity? What determined whether a soul remained whole or fractured? After further experiments, the author concluded, a soul only suffers damage when one believes they've lost a body part. A muggle who loses an arm in an accident assumes it's gone, and thus, their soul mirrors this loss. Wizards, however, never view lost limbs as permanent. They effortlessly regrow them using magic or potions. Deep down, they see such injuries as trivial, so their souls stay whole. In short, a soul's integrity depends entirely on one's subjective perception. This realization inspired the author to devise a spell capable of directly harming another soul, one that bypassed all defenses and struck at its very essence. Chapter 68. Voldemort wishes to talk with Xiaji. Upon reading this, Xiaji was utterly astonished. If such a spell truly existed, then the Avada Kedavra curse would indeed seem inferior by comparison. After all, Avada Kedavra could be blocked by objects, whereas this new spell seemingly could not. Yet, as Xiaji continued reading, he finally understood why this spell fell short of Avada Kedavra in effectiveness. The prerequisite for casting this spell on someone was that one's own soul strength had to exceed that of the target. Should one's soul strength be weaker than the target's, the spell would fail entirely. Attempting to cast it under such circumstances might even result in severe backlash against the caster. Essentially, using this spell amounted to a gamble. Either your soul's strength outmatched theirs and they died, or theirs surpassed yours and you perished instead. Given this, it naturally couldn't compare to Avada Kedavra, which guaranteed instant death with a single cast. Why risk one's own life in a gamble when a single spell could achieve the same result? That said, Xiaji recalled possessing the talent for crisis awareness. Should he attempt to cast this spell on someone, any feedback from that talent would indicate that the target's soul strength exceeded his own. In such cases, he'd refrain from using the spell. Conversely, if no feedback occurred, it meant he could safely employ it. Toward the end of the book, the exact incantation for this soul-based spell was provided, along with a method for measuring one's own soul strength and reference ranges for most individuals. However, the book never conclusively answered where exactly within the human body the soul resided. Curious, Xiaji tested his own soul strength. To his astonishment, his results revealed that his soul strength exceeded the average human level listed in the book by over tenfold.
Ding.
Host, never underestimate the bonuses granted by the Grand Mage template. A Grand Mage's soul strength is far beyond what ordinary people can match. Hearing this system notification, Xiaji's spirits immediately soared. This meant he could likely use the spell against the vast majority of enemies. With his crisis awareness talent as a safeguard, he no longer needed to fear mistakenly casting it on the wrong individual.
Ding.
Host has successfully read 100 black magic tomes. Reward: 5 skill points and the talent for combined magic. System: what exactly does combined magic talent entail?
Ding.
Combined magic talent allows the host to merge 2 or more spells together, enabling a single spell to possess the combined effects of all components. This significantly amplifies the spell's overall power. Xiaji's eyes lit up. This sounded incredible. For instance, combining this soul-based spell with Avada Kedavra would result in a spell that bypassed all defenses, yet still guaranteed death. He imagined that very few could possibly withstand such a combined spell. An Avada Kedavra spell that couldn't be blocked, only evaded, was terrifying just to contemplate. Now, the question became how to allocate those 5 skill points. After brief deliberation, Xiaji concluded that strengthening his overall power remained his top priority. Apart from black magic mastery and transfiguration, none of his other skills seemed capable of delivering immediate power boosts. His black magic mastery score already stood at 9, a level he deemed quite respectable. Yet his transfiguration score remained at a meager 5, which he felt was far too low. While adding points to black magic mastery would still enhance his abilities, he often couldn't openly wield black magic in public. Transfiguration, however, would grant him comparable power increases while remaining socially acceptable. Thus, Xiaji ultimately decided to invest all 5 skill points into advancing his Transfiguration Mastery.
Ding.
Host's Transfiguration Mastery has now reached 10 points. Reward: 1 random Transfiguration talent.
Huh?
Reaching 10 points grants a talent reward.
Ding. Correct.
Upon reaching 10 points in any mastery attribute, a talent reward becomes available.
Ding.
Congratulations, host, on obtaining a random Transfiguration talent. Would you like to claim it? Claim it.
Ding.
Congratulations, host, on receiving the Universal Animagus talent. With this, you may transform into any ordinary animal at will. However, magical creatures remain off-limits. Please avoid attempting such transformations. This was indeed a delightful surprise. Possessing Universal Animagus talent would make countless tasks far easier in the future. It was unfortunate, though, that magical creatures remained unattainable. Though he'd gone the entire night without sleep, Xiaji now felt exhilarated. Today had been an immensely fruitful day for him. He'd acquired the soul-based spell, Universal Animagus talent, and combined magic talent, while his Transfiguration Mastery had also crossed the 10-point threshold. His effort in reading 100 black magic tomes hadn't gone to waste either. Though his black magic mastery still hadn't hit 10 points, he sensed it wouldn't be long before it did. Through those texts, he'd also gained numerous valuable insights. Before he realized it, the clock had struck 6 in the morning. Xiaji resolved to return. His system tasks were complete. There was no need to revisit the forbidden section tonight. At this thought, he felt elated. At last, he'd get a proper night's rest. He stowed his wand inside his ring, then gradually shrank down into a cute little black cat, silently slipping out of the library. Once in the outer corridors, he ensured no one or wandering portraits observed him, then reverted to human form. Satisfied, he nodded. Transforming into any creature granted him all its inherent abilities. Truly wonderful. Now past 6, it was no longer technically nighttime. With that, he sauntered toward the great hall, eager for breakfast before bed. Yet, rounding a corner, he spotted a familiar figure. Professor Quirrell stood pale-faced, visibly startled upon noticing Xiaji. Xiaji himself paused briefly. "Good morning, Professor Quirrell. Enjoying some early exercise?" Good morning. I was merely heading to have breakfast. But you're going the wrong way, Professor. The Great Hall lies over there." Oh, is that so? I suppose I'm feeling a bit disoriented today. Ahaha. Both men, each harboring their own ulterior motives, exchanged amused farewells. Once Xiaji departed, Quirrell hurried back to his office, swiftly locking the door and casting multiple protective spells upon it. Suddenly, his stutter vanished entirely. He murmured softly, "Master, did you wish for me to summon him here for discussion?" A hoarse, frail voice emanated from the back of Quirrell's head. "Indeed. Did you not notice where he came from? The library? But at this hour, it remains closed."
Fool.
"He must have accessed the forbidden section. I knew he was one of us, someone equally desperate for power. Never have I seen someone so young wield fiendfire so skillfully. Hence, I must speak with him." "Master, you intend to speak with him yourself? Idiot. Of course, I must first test his resolve." Quirrell shrieked, collapsing to the floor as if subjected to unimaginable torment. Weakly he begged, "Master, spare me." The hoarse voice resounded once more. "So long as he craves power, he'll inevitably side with us. That old fool Dumbledore would never permit him such strength. Therefore, he'll unquestionably join our ranks." Chapter 69. Voldemort. Xiaji and I are the same kind of person. Xiaji had no idea what Voldemort was planning. Even if he had known, he would not have been afraid. His strength had increased tremendously, and he had even obtained soul magic. In his current state, Voldemort's remnant soul was practically his natural enemy. Since he no longer needed to sneak out in the middle of the night to wander around, Xiaji no longer felt so drowsy and muddle-headed all the time. And so, He spent the next several days peacefully. Nothing much happened during that time, apart from Harry coming to ask whether Xiaozhi wanted to investigate exactly what the small package he had taken from Gringotts actually contained. Xiaozhi refused. After finally completing a mission, all he wanted to do was lie flat, rest properly, and recover the energy he had lost over the previous week. He had no desire to get involved in the Chosen One's adventure. Since Xiaozhi no longer needed to catch up on sleep, history of magic no longer felt pleasant either. He had finally realized how frightening the class really was. Professor Binz's lectures were genuinely hypnotic, practically identical to the Chinese language lessons taught by his teacher in his previous life. With no better option, Xiaozhi pulled out a sheet of parchment and casually began writing. Ever since his transfiguration mastery had reached level 10, all sorts of new ideas about transfiguration had been popping into his mind for no apparent reason. He took advantage of the opportunity to write those ideas down on the parchment. As he wrote, Xiaozhi suddenly pulled out another sheet of parchment. He had realized something. Could other wizards learn his universal animagus ability? He immediately began recording his thoughts on the parchment as well. One strange and wonderful idea after another came to him, and Xiaozhi wrote with complete abandon. He secretly decided that he would show the material to Professor McGonagall later and ask whether his ideas were feasible. Cassandra had fallen asleep beside Xiaozhi long ago. Hermione was still stubbornly forcing herself to stay awake, but when she turned and saw Xiaozhi still looking energetic as he took notes, she could not help admiring him. She immediately forced herself to perk up and began taking notes with renewed determination. That was why Hermione looked so shocked when Xiaozhi asked to borrow her notes after class. Xiaozhi, for his part, was completely baffled by her expression. Next came defense against the dark arts. Professor Quirrell stood at the front of the classroom, stammering his way through the textbook. Xiaozhi, meanwhile, endured the classroom's thick garlic stench while compiling his insights into a paper and constantly refining it. What he failed to notice was that Quirrell's eyes kept drifting toward him throughout the lesson. Eventually, defense against the dark arts ended. Xiaozhi gathered up the parchment and prepared to drag Cassandra outside for some fresh air. Ever since attending Quirrell's defense against the dark arts class, Xiaozhi had not touched garlic even once. Xiaozhi, wait a moment. Would you like to come to my office and sit for a while? Quirrell's voice suddenly came from behind Xiaozhi. Xiaozhi frowned slightly. Quirrell had taken the initiative to approach him? Was this Quirrell's own idea, or Voldemort's? Had Voldemort finally decided to make a move against him? Xiaozhi asked Cassandra to go on ahead, then answered politely. Of course, Professor Quirrell. If possible, I actually have quite a lot of knowledge I'd like to ask you about. Xiaozhi followed behind Quirrell without looking at the back of his head. His right hand remained inside his robes, gripping his wand tightly. He was fully prepared. If Quirrell tried anything, Xiaozhi would make him pay immediately. Quirrell opened the door to his office. An even more pungent wave of garlic nearly knocked Xiaozhi off his feet. Xiaozhi endured it and concentrated all his attention on Quirrell, but on the surface he looked as relaxed as if he were heading out for a spring picnic. To his surprise, Quirrell did not attack him. Instead, he poured him a cup of black tea and served some refreshments. Naturally, Xiaozhi had no intention of touching either one. So, Quirrell really did want to talk to him? Did he intend to reveal everything right now, or was he trying to extract some information from Xiaozhi? I've heard about you from some of the other professors, Xiaozhi, Quirrell said, still stammering. Xiaozhi understood immediately. Quirrell was not ready to reveal his true identity. If he had been, he would not still be speaking in such a halting voice. I heard that you single-handedly drove off a dark wizard and even wiped out an entire Auror squad. To be honest, I have never seen such an outstanding young wizard. The Aurors simply didn't want to make things difficult for a child and went easy on me, Xiaozhi said with a smile. The dark wizard really was useless, though. The remark struck Quirrell exactly where it hurt. As expected, the corner of Quirrell's mouth twitched, and he then struggled to suppress the fluctuations in his emotions. Xiaozhi noticed the reaction immediately and felt delighted. He loved watching Quirrell seethe helplessly while pretending that nothing was wrong. May I ask why you called me here? Xiaozhi asked directly. Oh yes, Xiaozhi. I once took a year away from school and traveled. The experience taught me a great deal. This is a magical notebook I happened to acquire. It contains a lot of useful knowledge. I noticed that you are a very talented young wizard, so I thought it might help you. As he spoke, Quirrell took a small notebook from his desk drawer and handed it to Xiaozhi. Xiaozhi's thoughts began turning rapidly. Quirrell had called him here just to give him a magical notebook? What was he really after? Under normal circumstances, Quirrell should have been keeping as far away from him as possible. Still, none of Xiaozhi's thoughts appeared on his face. Instead, he put on an appropriately surprised expression. Is this really for me, Professor? I mean, this is an extremely precious gift. There's no need to thank me, Xiaozhi. If you have any questions about the knowledge inside, you're welcome to come and sit with me again. Xiaozhi left Quirrell's office without suffering so much as a scratch. He had expected to face Voldemort directly this time. Instead, Voldemort had given him a magical notebook and tried to win him over. What exactly did that mean? As Xiaozhi walked down the corridor, he casually opened the notebook. A short while later, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. So that was it. Voldemort had taken an interest in his abilities and wanted to recruit him. The notebook was filled from beginning to end with descriptions of powerful dark magic. At the very end, it even discussed Fiendfire. The Fiendfire in the notebook had been modified. It was not a complete version, and some of the content was missing, but judging from what remained, the complete spell would be no weaker than the improved, Grindelwald-style Fiendfire Xiaozhi already knew. The notebook had clearly come from Voldemort himself. If Xiaozhi had truly been a young wizard desperate for power, someone like the young Tom Riddle, then the powerful dark magic inside would certainly have tempted him and led him toward becoming a Death Eater. Unfortunately, although Voldemort's notebook would have been genuinely attractive to an ordinary young wizard, it was far too elementary for Xiaozhi. It held no temptation for him at all. In fact, it was almost funny. Voldemort's strategy was like trying to tempt a university mathematics professor with an elementary school mathematics textbook. To be fair, Voldemort could hardly be blamed for thinking he had a chance to turn Xiaozhi against Dumbledore. He had ordered Quirrell to investigate Xiaozhi's background, and the result had convinced him that the two of them were exactly the same kind of person. For one thing, Xiaozhi and Voldemort had both grown up in Wool's orphanage. Neither of them had had any friends from childhood. Then, because of Quirrell's deliberate investigation, Voldemort had learned part of the story about Xiaozhi slaughtering his way through the Albanian forest with dark magic. Voldemort had been overjoyed when he heard it. This was a naturally born dark wizard. At such a young age, Xiaozhi had already used unforgivable curses to slaughter his way through his enemies, something even Voldemort himself had not managed in his youth. And Xiaozhi's origins were so similar to his own. Voldemort was convinced that everything was under control. Still, to be safe, he had decided to use a dark magic notebook to test Xiaozhi's attitude. If Xiaozhi reacted with ecstatic delight and treated the notebook as a priceless treasure, then he would be exactly the kind of person Voldemort was looking for. And if he reported Voldemort to Dumbledore, Voldemort could simply claim that he had handed over the wrong notebook. Even so, Voldemort was 90% certain that Xiaozhi would not report him. Voldemort considered himself far too familiar with young wizards who yearned for power. He understood people like that perfectly. As for whether Xiaozhi might rebel in the future, what a joke. Once Voldemort resurrected, he would be invincible. A young wizard like Xiaozhi would have no choice but to submit before him. After leaving Quirrell's office, Xiaozhi casually stored the notebook inside his ring. From that day onward, whenever Xiaozhi saw Quirrell, he gave him a grateful smile. Xiaozhi also visited Quirrell several times and asked questions about the contents of the notebook. This gradually convinced Quirrell and Voldemort that Xiaozhi really was the kind of person they had imagined. Voldemort was now ready for Quirrell to begin the next stage of the plan. Thursday was the first flying class for the first-year students. Xiaozhi was naturally interested in it. After all, he could not keep flying around as an obscurus every time. He did not want to reveal that ability too easily. He was also genuinely curious. When a male wizard flew on a broomstick, did it hurt in a certain very sensitive place. For Harry, however, the class felt absolutely terrible because Gryffindor and Slytherin were taking flying together. He hated Draco Malfoy. That morning, Malfoy had come over to provoke him again and had even tried to steal the remembrall Neville's grandmother had sent him. Fortunately, Professor McGonagall had arrived in time and forced Malfoy to leave in embarrassment. Siaji arrived late and happened to see Malfoy walking away, along with Professor McGonagall standing there with her lips pursed. Whenever she wore that expression, it meant that she was in a very bad mood. Siaji felt that he had something that might cheer Professor McGonagall up. He pulled out the paper he had written and happily walked toward her. Chapter 70. A Transfiguration Paper That Shocked Dumbledore. Good morning, Professor McGonagall. Siaji's voice rang out. Upon seeing Siaji, the corners of Professor McGonagall's lips curled into a smile. Siaji was her favorite student. Even before he enrolled, she'd hoped he'd join her house. Good morning, Siaji. Professor McGonagall replied warmly. Oh, Professor, I've written a paper myself. If possible, I'd appreciate it if you could review it for me. Siaji took out his completed paper and handed it over. Of course, Professor McGonagall gladly accepted the parchment. She knew exactly how capable this student was, so she felt certain this would be an exceptionally good paper. She planned to take it back afterward and offer him detailed feedback. Should it prove truly outstanding, she might even help revise it for publication in Transfiguration Today. Professor McGonagall was a devoted fan of Transfiguration Today. Back when she was a student, she'd been awarded its Most Promising Newcomer prize, and now, as Transfiguration professor, she often volunteered to edit articles during her free time. Thus, if Siaji's paper got published, she'd be absolutely delighted. After Professor McGonagall left, Siaji ordered breakfast. Hermione was still muttering away, listing all sorts of precautions one must take when flying on brooms. Neville Longbottom stood beside her, listening intently, terrified of missing even a single detail. Before coming to Hogwarts, his grandmother had never even let him touch a broomstick. Cassandra Vole, meanwhile, wore a confident expression and proudly told Siaji that she'd flown straight to the leaky cauldron on a broom just to find him. Almost everyone was nervous, even Siaji worried. Would riding a broom somehow interfere with his eggs? After handling some miscellaneous tasks, Professor McGonagall returned to her office. She happened to have no classes that morning, making it the perfect time to review Siaji's paper. She took out his parchment. The paper was quite lengthy, and Siaji's neat, beautiful handwriting instantly lifted her spirits. This alone proved how serious and dedicated he was. She sipped some tea, then began reading the paper carefully. Yet the moment she saw the title, her expression turned grave. The title read, On the Possibility of Human Transfiguration by Non-Animagi. Human transfiguration had always been one of the most delicate subjects in Transfiguration. Any misstep during such transformations resulted in irreversible consequences. Throughout history, countless immensely talented wizards had attempted human transfiguration, only to end up as half-human, half-animal monstrosities, eventually dying in despair. Now, Professor McGonagall feared Siaji might have given into temptation and tried it himself. But as she continued reading, her expression shifted once more. She waved her wand, and numerous books promptly flew off her shelves. She cross-referenced them meticulously, line by line, verifying every argument Siaji had made. In the end, she reached a single conclusion. It was rigorous, utterly rigorous. Not a single error anywhere. At least, none she could find. Many of his arguments even surpassed those found in authoritative texts. By the time she finished reading, it was already noon. She'd spent the entire morning engrossed in it. She'd even missed lunch. Such meticulousness, such perfection. She'd never encountered anything like it. She simply couldn't find a single flaw to criticize. This meant what Siaji claimed, that non-animagi could indeed perform human transfiguration, was highly plausible. Excitement surged within Professor McGonagall. Should all his arguments prove valid, this paper would undoubtedly shake the entire wizarding world to its core. She stood up eagerly, clutching the paper, and headed straight for the headmaster's office. Professor Dumbledore was also a master of transfiguration. She felt he absolutely must see this paper. Hastily uttering the password, she entered the office. Dumbledore was happily savoring some candies called cockroach clusters. Only he'd enjoy such things. They were intensely sweet, shaped exactly like cockroaches, and actually moved. "Oh, my dear professor, you seem quite urgent today. Is there something important?" he asked. Professor McGonagall handed him the parchment. "Albus, I believe you ought to read this." Dumbledore took it and read intently, instantly becoming completely absorbed. Half-eaten cockroach clusters dripped amber-colored honey onto his white beard, yet he remained utterly unaware. After a long while, he finally exclaimed in awe, "Professor McGonagall, I never imagined your transfiguration skills had advanced this far. I'd wager this paper, if published, would send shockwaves throughout the entire wizarding world." "It wasn't written by me, Albus," Professor McGonagall replied, her excitement unmistakable. "Then who?" "Siaji brought this to me this morning, asking me to help revise it. But by Merlin's beard, I've spent the entire morning cross-referencing texts, yet I couldn't find a single counter-argument." "Siaji wrote this?" Dumbledore's eyes widened. No event in recent centuries had ever stunned him this much. But his transfiguration level doesn't seem high enough for this. "Do you mean someone else helped him write it?" Professor McGonagall frowned slightly. She trusted Siaji completely. "Oh, no, that's not what I meant, Professor McGonagall. I fully believe in Siaji's innate talent for transfiguration. I realized this myself when I first taught him." Dumbledore continued, "Now, after all this time, such progress seems entirely possible. My dear Professor, I believe we've encountered a prodigy on par with Merlin Reborn." Back in the common room, Siaji listened intently as Cassandra lectured on broom riding essentials. He'd wanted to ask whether riding a broom might interfere with his eggs, but when Cassandra asked him what eggs were, he quickly shut his mouth. The flying class was scheduled for that afternoon. He was genuinely looking forward to it. Though he recalled this class usually brought Neville some trouble, he'd once broken his arm or something similar. But now, with Siaji around, there was no way Neville would suffer any harm. Lost in thought, Siaji suddenly noticed an older student approach him. "Siaji, Professor Dumbledore requests your presence in his office now." Siaji thanked him and headed straight for the headmaster's office on the 8th floor. Unaware of the impact his casually written paper had made, he assumed Dumbledore simply wanted to discuss new findings regarding Quirrell. Upon entering the office, his eyes fell on the impeccably clean house hat. Fred and George truly did work efficiently. Then he spotted Professor McGonagall there as well. Dumbledore sat in his chair, fingers interlaced, smiling warmly at him with those piercing blue eyes. Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, did you need me for something?" Professor McGonagall appeared grave. She produced the parchment containing Siaji's paper. "Tell me honestly, Siaji, have you personally attempted human transfiguration?" Professor. Don't try to deceive me. Without hands-on experience, you couldn't possibly detail all those parameters so precisely." Her lips tightened once more.
"Oh.
"I'm sorry, Professor. Yes, I tried it. But I succeeded, didn't I?" Siaji lowered his head, bracing for a reprimand. From what he knew of Professor McGonagall, though she cared deeply for her students, she'd merely scold him lightly at worst. "You ought to be grateful you succeeded. Otherwise," her stern expression finally softened. "All right, dear boy. Now, can you tell me how you wrote this paper?" "Well, while doing my transfiguration homework, I suddenly had many new ideas. So, I took time to jot them all down, eventually compiling them into this paper. Such a paper capable of reshaping the entire wizarding world, and Siaji had written it casually in spare moments." Dumbledore. "Professor McGonagall. Is there any problem with this paper?" Siaji asked nervously. Dumbledore chuckled. "Actually, I've never seen such an excellent transfiguration paper, Siaji. If you'd be so kind, could you demonstrate the non-animagous human transfiguration you described here?
Oh,
Albus, you shouldn't let him risk it. What if? No problem at all, Professor. I've practiced it many times. Xiaji bent down, and his form began shifting. In an instant, a majestic lion materialized in the headmaster's office. The portraits on the walls gasped in shock. At first, they'd thought Dumbledore was merely exaggerating about the paper, but now, this was truly a prodigy of unparalleled talent. Professor McGonagall clutched her heart, watching the lion anxiously. It took 2 steps forward, roared twice, then reverted into a tiny black kitten. Finally, the kitten transformed into an owl, circled twice in midair, and landed softly, reverting to Xiaji's original form. Dumbledore applauded fervently, brimming with admiration. This paper would utterly revolutionize the wizarding world's understanding of animagi. It seems your transfiguration skills have advanced tremendously. Xiaji, may I publish this paper in Transfiguration today? Professor McGonagall couldn't contain her radiant smile.